Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rabbi Julia Andelman, Director of Community Engagement here at JTS, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this pre-Passover webinar. Before the worst of the stress enters our lives in terms of cleaning and all of that, we wanted to kind of take this intellectual and visual journey while we still can. Special welcome to anyone who's learning with us for the first time today. Our session today is called Between Words and Pictures, Medieval Illuminated Haggadot from the JTS Library. Hopefully you know about the incredible collections, special collections at JTS, and we're incredibly lucky that that Rabbi Dr. Marcus Mordecai Schwartz who has been teaching at JTS for many years, has recently begun a special new position with a special collection. So we're thrilled. We're thrilled to have this session with him today. We will pause a couple of times during the session for Q&A. So you can feel free to submit questions for Dr. Schwartz to me, Rabbi Julia Andelman, and I will choose as many as I can when we pause for Q&A. If you have questions of a technical or logistical nature, you can initiate a private chat with Tani Schwartz-Herman or Ellie Gettinger. And I want to thank Tani Schwartz-Herman for doing really all of the work to put today's program together. The images that we're going to be looking at today were in the email that you received earlier, and we'll also be screen sharing them, and we'll share a link in the chat shortly as well. So we're, again, so thrilled to have Rabbi Marcus Mordecai Schwartz teaching us today. He is Assistant Professor of Talmud at JTS. He serves now as the Ripp Schnitzer Librarian for Special Collections of the Library of JTS, overseeing the largest collection of Hebrew manuscripts in the world. And Rabbi Schwartz, I turn it over to you.
Hi, folks. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I am deeply passionate about the collection that we have here at JTS. The JTS Library and our collection, our special collections, our manuscripts, rare books, and archives represents the largest collection of Hebrew manuscripts, of fragments of Hebrew manuscripts, of 15th and 16th century books, and also the largest archive of synagogues and religious Judaism in America. And so by whatever measure you sort of use, whatever yardstick you use, we really do have the largest, the most extensive, the greatest collection of Judaica in the world. In terms of medieval manuscripts, we possess close to about 20% of the Hebrew manuscripts in existence in the world, which is really just an extraordinary measure. And so it's a really rich collection. And so whenever I present, and I present pretty frequently on our manuscripts and our rare materials, I always feel like it's a little bit of I'm just giving you a little taste. We have such a huge, enormous, large collection. There are a very large number of Haggadot that I could have picked today to show you. I have picked two, I think, of our greatest Haggadot, and that's really all that we are going to have time for today. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the Haggadah generally to begin. Then we'll jump right in and we'll look at what we call the second New York Haggadah. We have two Haggadot from a very famous Jewish artist, a scribe and artist from the 15th century, who lived in Germany and Italy, whose name was Yoel ben Shimon. And I'm going to show you one of those two Haggadot, what we call the second one, because we acquired it second. It's not second in terms of quality, it's just second in terms of when we acquired it. And then as we go through that material, I'll talk about mostly the images. I'm going to talk a little bit about the text that accompanies it as well, but mostly the images and what it tells us about the development of Jewish art. And then after that, I'll pause and I'll take questions. And then we're going to take a look at what we call the Prato Haggadah, which is a Spanish Haggadah, a very early illuminated Spanish Haggadah from the 14th century. And we don't know the name of the scribe or the artist who wrote or illuminated that one. But what we do know is that it's just an extraordinary, beautiful, and very unusual Haggadah manuscript, and I'll be able to talk about that. Okay, so I think at this point, what I'm going to do is, as I said, I'm just going to talk briefly about the Haggadah. One thing that's really extraordinary about the Haggadah is it's one of the few rabbinic texts, right? It's a text essentially of midrash that essentially is the genre of the Haggadah. Midrash that is recited liturgically. There are lots of communities, for instance, where what we call the halachic materials of rabbinic literature are recited liturgically. So, for instance, there's a very widespread practice to read a selection from Mishnah Shabbat between Kabbalat Shabbat and Mariv. In many communities, it's almost a universal custom. There are many communities where, as part of Shachrit, Mishnah is read. And so when we talk about the halachic elements of rabbinic literature, right, where the laws and rules are, there actually are quite a few times when we recite those things. But midrash, the recitation of story and of interpretation of biblical verses, and the midrashic, specifically kind of like an imposed meaning, an imposed rabbinic meaning, that's very unusual. And the reason that that's the case is because as far as the Mishnah is concerned, when it discusses what happens on the night of Passover and accompanying the special ritual foods, the matzah and the maror, which are eaten, is the account which is told over the table. And it tells you that we're supposed to start by interpreting verses from Deuteronomy 25, Arami Oved Avi, which is a very long section, which is in the Haggadah. And so what we're dealing with is, in fact, the process of giving an account or of giving a story. And when we're talking about story, when we're talking about midrash, which is both accessible as a form because it's story, and also a little inaccessible because it's an interpretation of verses which might not meet the simple language of the verses in terms of the account of the Exodus from Egypt. One of the best ways to help people understand story, especially when there are difficult or ambiguous parts, is to provide pictures, to provide illumination. There's another element involved, which is that there are often a whole range of different sorts of people at the Passover Seder who have different levels of Hebrew knowledge, different levels of Judaic knowledge. And so to have pictures that people can look at, whether they're children or adults, can be very, very helpful, can keep people's attention, can keep people engaged. And we find an increasing process during the late Middle Ages and early modernity of creating pictures within the Haggadot that people can look at. Now, those pictures are, on the one hand, as I've described, illustration, where they actually illustrate the account and give people, sort of a little boost in terms of understanding what's going on. But in addition to that, what happened is that a tradition of simple decoration evolved. And just like there are lots of, Christian manuscripts in the Middle Ages that are illuminated, a tradition developed within the Jewish community to illuminate particular manuscripts, one of the most prominent of these being the Haggadah. It's a relatively short book, so you can produce a relatively small manuscript, and you can invest it with lots and lots and lots of decoration. And in fact, there are very few text illustrations in this first Haggadah manuscript that we're going to look at. This is what we call, as I mentioned before, the second New York Haggadah, which was, according to its colophon, written, illustrated, and vocalized by one person, Yoel ben Shimon, who was also, he writes in the colophon that he also has a Yiddish name, Fivish Ashkenazi, who is living in Italy. He himself is an Ashkenazic Jew. He has come down from Cologne, probably as the result of some persecution that happened in Cologne. And he came down into Italy, and he had his career as a scribe and an artist in Italy. We have probably somewhere between 13 and 18 illuminated manuscripts where he participated in either just the illumination or just the writing or in both. This is a little bit of an unusual manuscript because in the colophon, the little note that he writes at the end, he credits himself, as I said, with all three things: the writing, the illumination, and the vocalization. There are other manuscripts that we have. So for instance, our Rothschild Machzor, that is currently on display at the Met. The Met Museum on Fifth Avenue. He participated in the illumination, we think, because it's his style, but he didn't involve himself in the writing and the actually functioning as a scribe. So he functioned in both ways. How did he get his training is a really interesting question, because Jews were not trained as artists, which has led some scholars to look at his work, and you'll have to decide if you think this is true, that he was very influenced by the growing culture of playing cards. And he saw playing cards and developed a kind of style that's very similar to playing cards. The very famous children's book artist Maurice Sendak was actually influenced by Yoel ben Shimon, and I think you'll see that a little bit as we actually go through here. So I think I'm going to ask now for the first image to be put up here, and we can talk about this image. Tanya, can you make that a little bit bigger? So the text here is the text here is Ha Lachma Anya, right? So you can see there's an initial word panel where you have in the very center there a hey and an aleph. That hey and that aleph are a very typical Ashkenazic style of hey and aleph. If you can look at those letters that are actually in the panel. You can actually also look at the letters that are below, where you get lach ma'anya de achalu avatana ba'ara dimitzrayim. And then the word kol is going to lead over, and it's the beginning of the next sentence on the next page. But what you can actually see here is that it's a very kind of square style. And I'm going to talk more about the letters in just a second. But what I wanted to show you, what I wanted to talk about first of all, is this extraordinary image that you have here in the center. So this is clearly a grid pattern. It's supposed to be a fabric. If you can see the kind of rope-like borders around all of the small squares, and then within each square you have either a rosette or the drawing of an individual. And these individuals are all unique. They are not repeated. Each one of these is a unique individual, and he's managed to invest them all with individual personalities. So this initial word panel has inside of it the word ha, this, the demonstrative, this bread of affliction, right? This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt. The next sentence, which we're going to see when we go over to the next page, is kol dichvin yete v'yechol. All who are hungry, kol, right? He puts kol on this page, and the rest of the sentence on the next page to talk about all of the people. I think that's the thing that's actually going on here, right? This is just the large number of people that you meet and that you see on the street each day as you're walking around in an Italian city in the 15th century, in the mid 15th century. And you can see them. There are knights and jesters. I've heard there are women and men. I've heard people make the claim that there are ladies of the night, or at least one lady of the night here in this particular sort of I guess you would say, conglomeration of different sorts of people. One of the amazing things about Yoel ben Shimon is that he really was interested in people. He was really interested in seeing all different sorts of people. And these are not necessarily Jews. It's a whole range of different sorts of people and types that you would see in, you know, an Italian city as you start approaching the Renaissance. In terms of what goal this is accomplishing. Is this a text illustration, right? Well, it may be, right? Let all who are hungry come and eat, meaning kind of everybody, let everybody come. You can see the very rich blue that the word ha has. You can also see the kind of thistle-like decorations that he puts on out on the sides. These kinds of tendrils are very typical of his style. And in terms of the Lamed ascender down below, you can see he puts even this kind of vegetative kind of flourish on the Lamed down below. I also want to show you one feature here. Ha lach ma'anya da achalu. After that word achalu, he is trying to justify the line. He's trying to get to the end of the line. So after the word achalu, at the very end of that first line at the bottom of the page with the letters, you can see there's a letter there that's not really a letter. It's what's called a graphic filler, where he creates a broken letter to kind of fill the line. It was very important to Jewish scribes during the Middle Ages to make sure that everything was justified properly, everything was set up properly, and so they had different kinds of styles of justifying the line. This graphic filler style is typical of Yoel ben Shimon, but we're going to see he gets very elaborate sometimes with these graphic fillers. Okay, so that's this first page. I think this is an extraordinary page. Let's move on to the next page. So this is the rest of the text. And you can see there's still these flourishes. If you look at the at just above the red text, we have an indication here. The two words that, or actually, it's more than just two words. Lashana da'atena Ba'ara di Yisrael b'nei chorin. What you have here is a line that indicates we're not dealing with the Ashkenazic Haggadah. The Ashkenazic Haggadah ends this little passage by saying, this year we're slaves, next year we will be in the land of Israel, right? Free people. So this means the same thing as the Ashkenazic Haggadah, but instead of L'shana ha'ba'ah, which you have in the Ashkenazic Machzor, this continues in Aramaic. L'shata da'atina. So here, the Italian, this is the Italian version of the Haggadah. It's not Ashkenazic, it's not Sephardic, it's Italian. They had their own kind of, sort of version of the Haggadah and of the prayers. One of the major features, for instance, is that instead of saying Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur, the Italians say Kol HaNidarim. They actually have all of Kol Nidre. What we do is Kol Nidre in Aramaic. They actually do the whole thing in Hebrew, which is a really interesting thing. Here, it's just the opposite. We do part of Halach Ma'anya in Hebrew. They do the whole thing in Aramaic, which is actually really interesting. We're down below. We have Ma Nishtana, and you can see the decoration on Ma. And it's also interesting to note that we have smaller print, smaller handwriting, smaller letters, and the letters are in red for the halachic instructions. And there are halachic instructions that are throughout this Haggadah, and they are the exact same halachic instructions that appear in every single Italian Haggadah. We don't know where they're from. People have made suggestions about particular Italian legal codes, Jewish legal codes that they could have come from, but none of them match up exactly. And the language is exact in every single one of these. So as I mentioned our Rothschild Machzor. Previously, that Machzor actually does have the Haggadah in it, and it actually does include these exact same word by word, exact same, letter by letter, exact same halachic instructions, but we have no idea where they came from. This is a decoration, this beautiful red on the ma, obviously, and you can kind of see, you can see the little nodules. First of all, there's a diamond shape with the descenders. So if you look at the descenders on the hay, and you also look at the little circle there, this kind of almost furniture quality, like a turned piece of furniture. That's very typical of Ashkenazic script. Okay, next slide. Next page. Yeah, and I included this page. There's very little decoration on this page. You can see the word chacham is in fact decorated. This is the wise son. So you'll which hopefully will be familiar to most of us from the Ashkenazic Haggadah. We do get the four sons in the text of.
I think we lost the sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so great. So I think that I accidentally hit this. Let me move this out of the way so I don't hit it again, because I think that's exactly what happened. Great. So there we go. Okay, so what I was saying is that this is the Chacham, this is the wise son, and we're used to seeing actual illustrations of these four sons that are presented in the Haggadah. Near the beginning of the Haggadah is an introduction to the telling of the story, and here we don't get any illustration. This is very typical. The other Haggadah we're going to look at today does in fact have those illustrations. This does not, and it's much more typical. It's really only a little bit later, sort of starting from really the time of print, that it becomes a regular feature, a really regular feature, that you're going to have images of the four sons. So this one doesn't. Yoel ben Shimon did in fact decorate the word both with black and red ink. He gave these little starburst kind of decorations, and you can actually see afikoman. The word afikoman, the last word on the page, is in fact got these little spirals coming off the descender on the kof, and the descender on the nun, which decorates it, gives it a special quality. But then at the end here, these graphical fillers, he put them at the end to justify the last word on the page. They don't actually, they're not large, they're quite small, and it's almost a different kind of strategy. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next page. So this is just to include, you can see the same kind of decoration, the emphasis on the letters, the graphical fillers. I think that here the Rasha and the Tam look like there's a wind blowing almost, where the kind of vegetative seeming quality of the decoration is kind of like, looks like it's blowing in the wind, like thistles or cattails or something like that, which is actually quite beautiful. But let's move on to the next page. And then this is the She'eino Yodea Lishol, and here you see the same red decoration at the top. The spirals continue. You can also see some of the fading here. This is a nice example here of smudging on the manuscript. How did that happen? Well, people had water. People had, you know, sort of salt water and karpas and water to drink, and somebody spilled. That's actually how it happened. So this was actually used, this beautiful manuscript was actually used as a Haggadah. We're going to see further examples of that, of staining and spilling later on. People weren't exactly careful all the time, especially with alcohol, which really causes, for instance, the red ink here to blur. Okay, next page. So I wanted to show this page because it actually does have some decoration on it. So this is Va'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim, and what we actually get here is a number of really interesting things. First of all, the Balayla Hazeh, right? Va'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim Balayla Hazeh, right? I will go through Egypt on this night. V'heketi kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, and I will put to death all of the firstborn sons of the land of Egypt. You can see here how it is highlighted. It's highlighted with red ink and decoration. Not only that, but there's almost a kind of a text illustration going on here. It's not clear to me if this is original or if somebody added this in later. One of the issues with Yoel ben Shimon is sometimes he's an excellent artist, a really incredibly beautiful artist. Other times his work looks very amateurish, and it's possible that this really is him, that he really did put this in at the beginning. It's very similar black and red ink. On the other hand, it doesn't stand up to the quality of the text illustration that we see throughout the remainder of the Haggadah. This is a rabbit running uphill on the margin of the page, and rabbits and chasing rabbits are a very common feature in the Haggadot of the Middle Ages. Lots of them have images of rabbits and hunting rabbits. There are lots of explanations that are given, linguistic explanations, other explanations. I think it's just rabbit hunting happens in the spring. That's when people go out and hunt rabbits in Europe. Just like the Easter bunny is a rabbit. I've heard explanations that it's that this is some kind of a mnemonic device because of that kind of kiddush that you make on a Saturday night, that the word in German sounds the same as in Hebrew, something like that. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me because the rabbits don't only occur on pages for kiddush. They also don't only occur in German manuscripts. This one is Italian, even though Yoel ben Shimon was German, but we're going to see a rabbit and rabbit hunting in Prato, which is Spanish. So I think it's just because of the spring. I also think it is an image of vulnerability, right? Vulnerability and hunting. Here, who's being made vulnerable is not the Jews. Who here is being made vulnerable is the Egyptians, and God maybe is killing them like rabbits, which is actually really interesting, which is the opposite of the way that we normally think of rabbits. Oftentimes you'll hear people talk about, when they talk about medieval Haggadot, they talk about the rabbits as being representatives or stand-ins for Bnei Yisrael. I'm not sure that that's the case. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, next piece here. Here's another example. This one's a much nicer example of text illustration. This is the section of the Haggadot where you have the Haggadah trying to increase the number of plagues, right? We start with 10, we go to 50, we go to 500, and we do that by it's assigning a number of plagues to the fingers of God, and then to the hand of God, and then to the arm of God. And we increase and we increase and we increase the numbers of plagues. Some of us, I'm sure, remember that. Here we have the phrase, Uvazroa nitu yashnaim, and with an outstretched arm, two. It's highlighted in red ink, and it's placed inside an arm. And then on the outside, there's some kind of red filigree that seems to be laying across the hand, which is actually rather interesting. But what this does is this has the effect of both illustrating the text and also decorating it in a really beautiful way. Okay, let's continue on. Yeah, so this I included because I wanted to show you this. You can't see the two-page layout. It's a really beautiful two-page layout, but you can see here that the 10 plagues, Dam, Tzfardeya, Kinim, Arov, Dever, Shechin, Barad, Arbeh, Choshech, and Makat Bechorot, blood, frogs, lice, the wild animals, the plague, the animal plague, the boils, the hail, the locusts, the darkness, and the death of the firstborn are all in red ink, and they are also marked off with these decorated highlights on top to show you the importance, to show you where we actually are when we start. And in a lot of Ashkenazic manuscripts, when you have these decorations on top, these squiggly decorations, it means it's supposed to be sung. And we see that in a lot of different medieval Ashkenazic manuscripts. That was not a feature of Italian manuscripts, but he's bringing it in, which is actually really interesting. And here you can see a very typical, after Kinim, after that first red line, you can see a very typical characteristic graphic filler, a graphic filler that is, again, another one of these broken letters that's very typical of Yoel ben Shimon. He has this extra little line that he adds. It also makes it almost makes it look like a musical note, which is really, really interesting. And then we have Rebbe Yehuda's name here. This is, a mnemonic device, Datzach Adash Ba'achav, we're going to have on the next page. And it's very beautifully written on the next page, but it's Rebbe Yehuda who provides this mnemonic device. He says, all you have to do, it's very easy to remember the order order of the plagues, all you have to remember is Datzach Adash Ba'achav, and you can remember the order of the plagues. Of course, then you have to remember Datzach Adash Ba'achav, which is difficult to do because it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything in Hebrew either. So I'm not sure exactly what that's about, but okay. Rabbi Yehuda Notein Behem Simanim, and you can see here after Hayat Notein Behem, there's another broken, like a graphical filler, but here it's a two-word graphical filler where it's kind of a samech. There's no yod, but the beginnings of like a broken mem down below in order to get this to be centered, to have it justified so that we can put simanim down below immediately underneath. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next page. And this is just gorgeous. I mean, really, really gorgeous. And can we make this any bigger? Can we focus on yeah. So if you look at each one of these, words, Datzach Adash Ba'achav, which each letter is supposed to stand for a word. That's actually how the mnemonic device works. So not only is it black and red, not only does it have these floral decorations, which are extraordinary, but we actually have within each letter the word that it stands for. So dam on the dalid, in the tzadi, it has it in the two squares at the tops of the ascenders, right? Sephardeia, 2 letters in one, 3 letters in the other. Kinim in the kaf, in the kaf sofit, rov in the ayin, etc., all the way through consistently. And it's just really extraordinary that he did this, but he's doing this to highlight for you exactly how the mnemonic device is working visually. We also have 2 features here on this page, which are very, very typical and incredibly beautiful. It shows Yoav ben Shimon's talent. His ability to show the folds in fabric is just extraordinary. I'm actually going to end with one of his initial word panels that has these folds in fabric, but these ribbons are so inside the word Rebbe, are so incredibly compelling and 3-dimensional. It's just is in this really unusual, smaller, but also kind of wavy script, which is kind of almost an artistic flourish. He is making a distinction between the halacha construction and the text of the Haggadah. Okay, next slide. Yeah, can we go on, blow up the fichach? Yeah, I really wanted to show you this. This is just extraordinary. This is not an illustration in any way. These are what we call grotesques. The lamed is a dragon. We have lots of examples of 13th and 14th century lameds being turned into dragons. That was very typical in an Ashkenazic setting. It's a little late for dragons, but he's still putting dragons. Yoav ben Shimon in particular really likes dragons. He puts them in throughout. You can see in the pay that follows this young man who's actually, it seems to be training a baby dragon while standing on the back of another, which is extraordinary. The face coming out of the yod with kind of floral decoration. And then these animals, which are hard to identify, these grotesque animals, birds and maybe fish, perhaps a lion. It's not clear to me if I think that actually might be a pig, which is unusual at the top of the kaf. You can see here, I think, here and in other places, especially his people, the way he draws his people, the influence that I was talking about before in terms of Maurice Sendak, also the grotesque animals. Here and in other manuscripts, Yoav ben Shimon loves creating false animals that don't exist. And some of them actually were, I think, not in this manuscript, but in others manuscripts of his, kind of models for where the wild things are. You can kind of get a sense of that here, which is actually really extraordinary. Okay, let's continue to the next one. Yeah, what did I do here? Can you make it large, smaller? Oh yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. So this is right after the second cup, or right at the second cup, the drinking of the second cup. And this is supposed to be, if you look at this halakha construction, which is really small. It says mevorech borei pri hagafen. So we actually get the text here, borei pri hagafen, right? Which is, you know, not the Ashkenazim do it with a pausal form, borei pri hagafen, but the Italians do borei pri hagafen. And one of the things that's actually extraordinary is he wrote out in red ink, right, the blessing. But what's happened here, right, is that people actually drank the wine and spilled it. And so you get this smudging here. This is also very typical of medieval Haggadot. Jews really use their books. Okay, let's go ahead to the next one. Yeah, can we go to the bottom here? Yeah. So this is the end of Hallel, and I wanted to show you this Italian Renaissance iconography, the Cupid's arrow here. That's extraordinary, right? That Cupid's arrow is here, except here it's changed into, instead of being about courtly love, it's changed into a kind of a symbol of divine love, let's say it that way. Either our love for the divine, right? It's at the end of Hallel, right? It's about the connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. It might be a text illustration. It could also just be that he puts it in as a decoration because it's a common motif. I suspect it's more than that. And you can see here in terms of the text, the distinction that he is making on this page, using the same text that he used previously to talk about the halakha construction. Here, what he's doing is he's using these rabbinic letters to indicate a distinction between the Psalms, the text of Psalms, which is just above, and down here, the rabbinic blessing after Hallel, which is Melech Mehulal B'Tishbachot, and then the heart afterwards is really just a very nice touch. Okay, next page. Yeah, so this is the last page of this Haggadah that I am going to show you. The very last page is this colophon where he writes out, but I'm not going to show you that. This I'm going to show you just as an example of his extraordinary skill and talent at drawing fabric. This is Hodu Lashem Kitov, Ki Leolam Chasdo. There's no reason to put it on these folds of fabric in this way, but this is just showing his, you know, prodigious skill. And he really did have prodigious skill. Like I said, sometimes it's a little uneven. People have made the argument that he's got apprentices that he sometimes used for some of the other pictures. It's not exactly 100% clear to me, but you see something like this, you're just kind of like blown away by someone who's really, in some ways, I would classify this as outsider art. He had no actual professional training as an artist, which is that we know of, which is actually, and it seems unlikely to have had. So this seems really just extraordinary that he's able to sort of marshal such an amazing amount of skill in creating something like this image. Okay, I think that's the last slide here. I think, Tani, what we can do is we can take away the PDF, and I can take some questions about this before we move on to the next one.
Wonderful. Okay, Tani, I know that I asked you to keep the image up because there were questions about specific images, but
great, fantastic.
You know, there's so many questions. I think we can take it off actually, and I'll, because there's some other ones I'll ask you. This is wonderful, and I recommend to everyone to you know, download the sources yourself too, and then you can blow them up on your screen as he's speaking.
I also want to say both of these Haggadot are available up on our digital collections website, which is if you do a Google search for JTS Library Digital Collections, you can go to our Haggadah on the front page. There's a Haggadah collection, and you can see all of these in very, very high quality TIFF format pictures. You can blow them up as big as you want. It's and you can see not only this Haggadah, but all of our Haggadot, all of our medieval and early modern Haggadot.
Great. So a few people asked, since we don't have this, you know, we're not looking at it in person, what are the dimensions of this Haggadah? Is it huge? Is it little?
So it's the size of, you know, I have a book here that's about the same size that I can show you. This happens to be a book on old literary Yiddish, but it's about this size. roughly this size, a little bit thicker, maybe about 1.5 times the size, the thickness of this book. It's small enough that, and all the Haggadot are small enough you can hold them in your hand. Most of them are not tiny. We do have very small prayer books from the Middle Ages that people carried around with them. We have very small Mishnayot that people carried around with them to study Mishnah. We have very small, home ritual, like Birkat Hamazon, those kinds of things that people would carry around with them. But the Haggadot are not texts that people carried around with them. They use them at home. And so they're a little bit larger, but not so large that you can't hold them in your hand. And they're a lot of them are around that size. The two Haggadot we're going to look at today are about the same size.
Great. And should we assume that someone who had a Haggadah like this in their home is a wealthy person? Like how common would it be to have a Haggadah at all, or a beautiful Haggadah like this in one's home? And someone asked, like we have so many Haggadot, sitting, everyone has one at the table. Would it have happened that a family would have more than one?
So great question. So first of all, most of the Haggadot from the Middle Ages are texts that people wrote out themselves. They are, and I have a lot of examples actually of what you kind of call, folk production Haggadot, where people actually just write out the text. They get some parchment or some paper, and once paper is produced regularly, and they just write out the Haggadah for themselves in kind of a folk style. So there's that, first of all. Second of all, the Haggadah we're about to look at does not have Kiddush in the front. I'll talk a little bit about where it's from, whether it's from France proper, Spain proper, or whether it's from Provence. But we know that in Provence, oftentimes what would happen is that people would recite the Kiddush for themselves, and then someone would walk around the town with a Haggadah, come to the different homes, and then read that one Haggadah again and again and again over the course of the night. That's recorded in Sefer HaManhig, which is a medieval Provençal code. So there was that practice in some places. A third practice was the recitation of the entire Haggadah in the synagogue, that people would say Hallel, and they would also say the recitation of the Haggadah in the synagogue, and then go home and have Kiddush and the meal and the eating of matzah and all of that at home. So they would not do it in the typical order because they just couldn't get the resources to do it. In Italy, a Haggadah like this, I think is going to be the Haggadah of a wealthy person, but I suspect they're going to be the only person at the table also who has that, who has a Haggadah, and that's part of the reason for the size of the decoration, the illustration, so that they can show it. I suspect one of the reasons that the Four Sons appears in increasingly after the age of print is because now, once you have printed Haggadot, a lot of people at the table can have Haggadot, and they can see, the imagery of the Four Sons, and that's something that people want to see. Why is the Four Sons in the Prato Haggadah, which we're about to look at? Well, I'll talk about that hopefully when we get there. I'm looking at the time; we have 15 minutes left. Although I'll stay on and maybe an extra 10 minutes or so to answer questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if you could. I personally have to leave right at 2 p.m. Eastern, and others might as well. But we'll continue recording, and
sure.
And Ellie can continue.
Terrific.
With moderating questions.
Terrific.
Let me see if there's there. Let me squeeze in one more. So it's actually two kind of related questions. Oh, there's so many good questions here.
It's hard.
So someone asked, do we know what part of Italy this is from? Because according to this person, there might be very different traditions, and in Rome and Tuscany and different places. And the related question was, someone mentioned that he actually has another Haggadah by the same person, which he said is very different from this one. So
right. So I generally try not to talk about manuscripts that aren't in our collection, but there are some very famous. I mean, he's people, when scholars of Jewish art talk about him in articles, oftentimes they just call him Joel, like he's like Titian or Rembrandt. You know what I mean? Like as a one name kind of thing. So he's very, very famous. And like I said, there's a lot of argument about which manuscripts are his or which manuscripts aren't his, but there are a couple of very famous ones. So the Library of Congress has one called the Washington Haggadah, where there's a facsimile out that's really beautiful. That's the one that I was talking about in terms of like Maurice Sendak having a lot of influence on Maurice Sendak. There's also the Ashkenazi Haggadah, which is not called the Ashkenazi Haggadah because it's Ashkenazic, but instead because the owner was named Ashkenazi, right? And that's Yoel ben Shimon also. There are a number of other really famous manuscripts. Why is this one have less illustration? I imagine that's because the owner paid less for it. That, in other words, he was willing to put more work in if you were willing to pay more. Remember, he's got a shop and he's trying to make money. This is a commercial enterprise, which is another reason why people talk about him perhaps assigning apprentices maybe to the process of making certain ones, which is why you get uneven art in some of them, why you get that illustration of that bunny, for instance, which looks so amateurish. And at the same time, you get like these incredible folds in the fabric. And as a result there's a lot of dispute, let's say it that way, about which manuscripts, if there's not a colophon, which manuscripts he did participate in, which manuscripts he didn't participate in. But very clearly, he was very active in Italy in the 15th century. So a lot of material that's from him and by him.
And the question about what part of Italy this might have been.
It seems like it's northern Italy. He was, Ferrara, Mantua, maybe the area around Venice, Sabionetta. So yeah, he was never really in South Italy. So not Rome, right? Although that's the other interesting thing is that because of the influence of the Colonimus family, who were originated in Rome and then came up through Italy and up into Germany in the very early medieval period and had a huge influence, right? Really important rabbis all over. You have this kind of influence of the nusach of the version of their prayers and their Haggadot just being an influence on everybody. And so you find them also influencing the Ashkenazic Siddur and Haggadah as well. So even though it's true he's in northern Italy, the Haggadah has kind of resonance throughout, this particular version of the Haggadah has resonance throughout all of Italy.
Great. So we'll have to do this again next year to ask all these other questions, but why don't we go ahead to the Prato Haggadah?
Yeah. So I'm going to try and be somewhat quicker, but there's so much to talk about here. So let's go ahead and put it up. Yeah, I mean, this first page is just extraordinary and really does set, I think, a very, very kind of paradigmatic sort of approach, sort of image and approach that we can use when we're trying to understand what's going on in this Haggadah. So there are a number of things that we want to note here. So this really is the very first page of the Haggadah. I did not start the second New York Haggadah. On the very first page, there's a whole introductory element with, the searching and burning for chametz, which you find today in typical Haggadot also, but also prayers for the evening of Passover in the synagogue. A whole range of different things that you have there. Kiddush. None of that is in Prato. Prato starts this way with Ha lach ma'anya da'achlu avatana ba'ara de Mitzrayim, right? That's what we get here, right? This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. We do not start with Kiddush, which is what has led a number of people to say, Menachem Schmelzer among them, Michal Sternthal, that we're dealing with a kind of Provençal halachic element here. It is, the provenance, people have told us it's Spanish. It does look like a lot of other Spanish Haggadot. It has a version which is very close to the typical Spanish version in terms of what's actually here. But Provence and Spain were actually more closely linked than France north of the Loire Valley in Provence in this period. And so it makes sense that there would be cultural influence from Spain. You can see the gold leaf, the extraordinary number of pigments, the expensive and lavish materials. You can see how flawless, even in this picture, how incredibly flawless and burnished the parchment actually is here. It's a beautiful writing surface where you can see almost no grain, very little grain on the surface of this parchment. And we also see the floral and dendric decorative elements, the grotesque animals. And we also have here a stag hunt, right? If you see the dog who is chasing after the stag at the bottom of the page, on top of the kind of tree-like, what we call dendric forms, this dog is going to chase the stag throughout the entire Haggadah. He'll be distracted by a rabbit at a certain point, and then he'll eventually come back and actually capture the stag. So one of the things that if you're sort of a child at the Seder and you see this, one of the ways of keeping you interested might be to say, look at the dog and the stag, follow it along, sort of when does the rabbit come in, when does the rabbit escape, and then you can kind of be held, your interest can be held by those elements as you move through. Okay, next page. Yeah, so this is Manishtana. You can see just incredible, the gold leaf and these materials. You can see how the initial word panels are here. And you can also see how I think here the text comes first. That's what's going on in Prato. Other Haggadot are a little bit different, but the text comes first. The scribe put the words on the page, and then the artist had to fill in the initial word panel and had to fill in space and still had to get the word ma in. And so you wind up with this, even though it's kind of rectilinear, it's not perfect, right? It's actually kind of got a little bit of a gap bitten or a little square cut out of it in order to fit the text in. Okay, next page. In this Haggadah, we actually get the depictions of the four sons. We get Chacham. This is the depiction of the Chacham. And with the Chacham in the Spanish Haggadot, when we actually do see him, because not all of them have it, a lot of Spanish Haggadot, as I said, medieval Haggadot don't necessarily have illustrations of the four sons. I think since this is a Provençal, manuscript. I'll just reveal that. That's my own bias. And I think since it's being carried around and shown to people that you can actually have these illustrations, because the person in their house is being shown, also the householder is being shown the manuscript by someone who is going around from house to house showing, so he's able to walk around from person to person in the house and show them the images, so people can actually see it. You see here in the iconography here, the Chacham is holding a book, which is very, very typical. You also see that his face and his hands are pencil illustrations as opposed to colored illustrations. That's for one of two reasons, and I'm not sure which. One is that this Haggadah, which we're going to see later on, is unfinished. I've heard people make the argument that for whatever reason it's unfinished. We don't know why it's unfinished. I've heard people make the argument that, the patron who commissioned it or the town who commissioned it ran out of money, maybe. It was also made in the wake of the 1366 expulsion from France. So maybe there's some persecution going on and people have to take it with them. I'll show you something very interesting about the expulsion from France in just a second. But that's one possible reason, is that it's unfinished. The other possible reason is that the delicacy of the line. There's this attempt in all of the depictions of the faces. None of the faces in this entire manuscript are illuminated. They are all done with pencil. I believe all the hands are as well. So it could be that they're just trying to maintain the delicacy of the line. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next page. Yeah, here's the Rasha. This is very typical of the Rasha. He is a typical swashbuckling mercenary. He's got the buckler on his belt. That's a little shield. He's got a dagger, and he's got 3 swords. He's got a dagger, a short sword, what's called a bastard sword, and a Spanish espada, a long sword that he's carrying on his shoulder. That was typical in terms of what these mercenaries went into battle with. And the Rasha in Jewish iconography through the age of printing, right up until the middle of the 19th century, they're almost entirely soldiers. The Rasha, what makes the Rasha is his tendency towards violence, which is rather interesting. The idea of the Rasha being kind of an assimilationist is something that you only get. The wicked son being an assimilationist is something you only get in the late 19th and early 20th century. It's violence that is associated with wickedness in the minds of Jews in the Middle Ages, and you can come up with your own reasons for that. And you can see here his hands and his face are penciled in. Okay, let's continue on. Yeah, so the Tom at the top of the page, the simple son, has nothing in his hands, right? Which is really interesting, right? So a book, a sword, right? That's very typical iconography for the Chacham and the Rasha. The Chacham holds a book, the Rasha holds a sword, the Tom has open hands, the simple son has open hands. The one who doesn't know how to ask, his hands are folded, right? Closed and folded. And that's very, very, very typical of the imagery of the Haggadah. And you can see here that the She'enu Yodei Lishol, he's reversed the typical gold leaf. The one who doesn't know how to ask, the letters in themselves don't have gold leaf on them. Instead, it's the background that has gold leaf. So the letters are emblazoned in gold with the other sons, but this son, it's just pigmented. He's the one who doesn't know how to ask. That's really interesting. Okay, let's go ahead. And you can see the dog continuing running across the page, chasing the stag. But here we get Hisha Amda, right? So this promise that God made to us, it has continued on. And then if you look at the next page, it's even more amazing. Let's go to the next page, because if it continues it, this is the very next page. This is a spread in the Haggadah, these 2 pages. If you open it up, and then you see these 2 pages, and it goes through God standing up for us, holding on to the promise. But then it says, V'gam et hagoy, right? So this starts with the word gam, V'gam et hagoy asher yavodu, dan anochi, and also the nation which oppressed them, I will judge. And if you look inside that initial letter box, you can see that you've got the fleur-de-lis, which is the symbol of the French royal family. And as I said, this Haggadah was written probably in Provence, probably within 20 years of the expulsion from the French territory north of the Loire Valley. And there probably are, refugees, exiles, whatever you want to call them, coming down from north of the Loire Valley into Provence. And this message here is a very clear one, right? Who's God going to judge? God's going to judge the Bourbons, which is really very interesting. It's not something that a censor would necessarily pick up on either, right? In other words, a censor might not, and it clearly has not, because nobody tried to expurge it, wouldn't necessarily pick up on the message that it's not the Egyptians that we're talking about who God's going to judge, but it's the French royal family that God's going to judge, which is actually rather interesting. Okay, next page. Here we got the beginning of Tzei Umad, Ma Bikesh Laban Ha'arami, La Asot Liakov Avinu, right? Look how terrible Lavan was, that he wanted to destroy Jacob. Pharaoh only wanted to destroy the males. Laban wanted to destroy everyone. People kind of remember that text from the Haggadah. It comes immediately on the heels of B'chol Dor V'Dor Omdim Aleinu L'Chalotenu. In every generation, the wicked, stand up to destroy us, right? So here's another example of how I'm trying to teach kids Hebrew. If you look here, the word omed, omdim, well, there's a standing bear or monkey or gorilla or something there with a little ball. And it's very easy to say omed, omdim, look who's standing on the page. And it's not necessarily related to the content. It's just related to the meaning of that word. That word is relatively simple Hebrew that you can expect a 7 or an 8-year-old to know in this time period, right? Omed, omdim, and they can say point to the standing monkey, and you can point to the standing monkey holding that golden ball. Okay, let's go to the next page.
Dr. Schwartz, I'm just going to interject for those who need to leave at the originally advertised time. I just want to thank you for this amazing thing, and thank all of you folks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. There's so much to talk about. There's so much. I was really going to try and do 3 Haggadot. That clearly would not have worked. So I'm glad I only did 2. I just want to say before you go that this is Eretz Goshen. This is where the Jews lived in Egypt. It's a medieval town. So I wish you all who are leaving joy in your own homes. And we can use this little image to actually wish you farewell, etc. So
wonderful. Yeah, and for all those who are leaving, we wish you, of course, a wonderful holiday, and we'll share some additional Passover learning for you in a follow-up email. And I will be so those have questions now, you should start sending them to Ellie Gettinger, and I'll send her a handful of the questions that I've already received. And thank you so much again, Dr. Schwartz, for teaching us today.
Sure, absolutely. So let's go ahead and go to the next page, because I already talked about Goshen here, right? It's medieval. So and here we get to the part where we have unfinished pages, right? So this is Rabban Gamliel teaching his students. Okay, the next page. Here we get Pesach, and it's a lamb. You can see the pencil drawing that was set up. You can also see what I was talking about before. Here we clearly see the text is finished, but the illumination is not. The gesso as base for what would have been the gold leaf is there. That's the kind of brownish, peachish text. That's the gesso that's built up to be kind of like, it's made out of gypsum. It's built up to kind of be a pillowing or a cushioning for the gold leaf to make it a 3-dimensional on the page. So the next one. Yeah, and here we have the matzah page where the gold leaf has been applied and the blue pigment has been applied, but the red, green, and yellow pigment has not. And I think I might end with this slide. The piece here that I wanted to show you and I wanted to emphasize to you is how the matzah is monumental in the Spanish and Provençal Haggadot. It's round, which is all matzah was round before the 19th century, before there were machines making matzah. And you can also see here these extraordinary geometric patterns that are in all of the Spanish and Provençal matzot that are depicted. Here you have 2 people holding up the matzah. That's very typical also with the maror. You have 2 people holding up the maror as well. I guess there is one more slide. Why don't you go to that next slide and you can see that as well. There, the maror is a leaf, which is typical. Maror is almost always a leafy green. It's a bitter piece of lettuce is what it is. It's only Ashkenazic Jews, once they made it to Central Europe even, that start eating horseradish as maror. It's very clearly, typically, and regularly in all of the medieval manuscripts a leafy green, and that's what it most often is. And you can see here, though, it's the exact same format as the matzah. 2 people holding it up like this. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I think I can take a few questions. I have about 10 minutes, and then I have to go because I have another meeting after this.
You're in meetings all day. I'm Ellie Gettinger. I'm playing the part of Julia Anderman at this point. So I think a lot of the questions are kind of about, or there are a number of questions that are looking at the porousness of engagement between Jewish and non-Jewish communities. One is about, and I think these two kind of dovetail this idea of, was there any connection? Were Jews, did they have access to Christian manuscripts to see what Christian illuminated manuscripts looked like? And also the comparison there would be in the New York Haggadah, there were really not very many. There were maybe a couple of images of faces, but for the most part, people weren't depicted. There were a lot of people in the Prato Haggadah. And did that have anything to do about the second commandment and creating a clear division between Christian and Jewish art?
So my answer to that last question is no. I just want to remind you that the opening with the New York Haggadah is a collation of faces.
Oh, that's
Right?
right.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right. How
Sorry.
we began. And Yoel Ben Shimon has no trouble in his other work depicting all kinds of people. I think the only reason that in the second New York Haggadah there are fewer people is because the patron probably paid less for the object. In other words, faces and hands are hard. Anyone who's ever tried to draw knows that faces and hands are hard. It's a lot easier to do decoration. And Yoel Ben Shimon's very good at fabric. He's very good at fabric. And so he's much happier to do fabric, I think, for less money. The way that rabbinic tradition, the Karaites are a little different, but the way that rabbinic tradition worked in terms of the second commandment is that it's only if you were making it as an image to be worshipped that it's prohibited. Images of human beings are permitted. Some people were careful to leave out a part of the body. So to leave out a foot or to leave out a hand, so that you couldn't say that it had the appearance of an idol. In other words, it's fragmentary, and therefore, according to the Mishnah and Avodah Zarah, non-Jews won't worship, or idol worshippers won't worship fragmentary images. They're only going to worship whole images, and so you're not leading anyone to sin that way, meaning non-Jews into sin, or for that matter, Jews who might be idol worshippers. But it's clearly the context of idol worshiping, and in the Mishnah there is non-Jews. So there's no prohibition, and in fact, in just about every single location in the world, even in Islamic countries, Jews did draw images of people in their manuscripts, in their Haggadot, in their other kinds of manuscripts. So animals, birds, those would be a problem too. Those are specifically mentioned, but it's not a problem for rabbinic tradition.
The bird head Haggadah just came up in the question, so yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not a problem. That's actually rather interesting. The bird's head Haggadah. It's a question about why are they doing the bird's heads. I think that it has nothing to do with depicting human beings. I don't think that that's an issue actually at all. I suspect it has more to do with the fact that they're wearing the Judenhut, the Jewish hat, and so there's a concern, maybe, although there are lots of other manuscripts where Jews are depicted wearing, human beings depicted wearing the Judenhut, but I think that there's a discomfort there, and so they don't want to depict them as people. I suspect that that's what's going on. But again, I'm not gonna really talk about manuscripts that are not in our collection.
Right. That's not. No,
you can ask someone from the Israel Museum about the bird's head Haggadah. So in terms of the relationship with non-Jews and whether they had access to Christian manuscripts, it's an interesting question. They certainly had access to the illuminated charters that they got from the various royal families. So we have lots and lots of letters of patent and charters from the Middle Ages that have royal seals. So for instance, the Crown of Aragon gave charters to Jews to live in their territory, and they were supposed to be protected. That didn't really happen in 1390 when there was this massive set of massacres, but they were supposed to be protected by the royal family, by the Crown of Aragon, but they just couldn't pull it together politically to be able to do that. So they saw their royal seals, and there are people who argue that the matzah and the geometric patterns on the matzah are actually derived from royal seals in Spain. We have these beautiful letters of patent to the Ambron family in Italy, which are incredibly lavishly illustrated, for instance, by the Medicis in the Republic of Venice, various bishops. And so they had access to that. Do they have access to imagery of the Eucharist, which is always the question with regard to the matzah, right? Remember, in this period, the Catholic Church is only doing communion with a single species. Only the priests are drinking the wine. Everybody else is just having the wafer. So it's not surprising that we don't really see depictions of wine in the Haggadah, but we do see depictions of the matzah in the Haggadah. Perhaps that is under the influence of the importance of the Eucharist in the Christian community, and so there was this attempt to put forward the Haggadah as a in the Haggadah depiction of matzah to be an undermining element in kind of the Eucharistic practice, that by highlighting the matzah, which is the big mitzvah, by the way, other than telling the story of Pesach, that it does have an undermining effect on the Eucharist. Depictions of the Eucharist would have been available on the outsides of churches in Spain. People can go and you can see depictions of the Eucharist over archways, all kinds of things on the outside, architectural depictions. Jews actually would probably have seen those things. I think Yoel ben Shimon, however, is in Italy, there's already a culture of gambling and of cards, as I mentioned before. I think there's probably more influence coming in that way. Were they seeing, you know, the hours of Jean de Navarre? No, they were not. Clearly not, because nobody was seeing, like Christians weren't seeing that either, right? That's made for a queen. So no, there's no way they would have seen that. So you can go to the Met, you can see a bunch of Duc de Berry manuscript, beautiful, unbelievably gorgeous Christian manuscripts. You should go. You should also see our Rothschild Machzor. You should see our Prague Haggadah, which is there right now as well, and our little Franconian Machzor. They're all there on display. The Prato Haggadah is up at the cloisters. You should go and you should see that as well, along with the new Masoretic Bible that they've gotten in. You should see our manuscripts at the Museum of the Bible as well. We have some beautiful, beautiful Masoretic Bibles that are down at the Museum of the Bible, and one of our best Talmud manuscripts. So you should go see all of those things.
Thank you so much. I know you have to go, so I'm going to wrap up here, but this is, you know, now all of us need to plan trips to New York, if we're not already in New York, to go check out this incredible pilgrimage of different manuscripts that we can see. And we will be back with Morty on Monday. So, you know, just in 4 days, you too can hear Morty again, but this time we're going to be learning about, this is part of our series, The Space Between, Thresholds and Borders in Jewish Life, and Dr. Schwartz is going to be talking about gender identity in the Talmud. There was a New York Times editorial just in the last couple of days about this. I think it's going to be a fabulous talk, so I hope you'll join us again. And also, if you want more insight into Passover learning, we have a lot up on our website, and so I'm sharing that link with you all. And please have a lovely weekend and Shabbat Shalom. We don't get to say that on a Monday webinar, but on a Thursday, I feel like it's appropriate.
Yep, Shabbat Shalom and a Zisen Pesach, a kosher and Zisen Pesach. A pleasure.
The recording will be available of this. So yes.